I'm Cory Johnson. I'm the Chief Market Strategist for Ripple, and I'm here at Ripple headquarters right here in downtown San Francisco with my boss, Brad Garlinghouse. This is really weird because I have interviewed you for years when I was a journalist, and now that I work here, I didn't think.
I know, the tables have turned. Now you can't ask the really biting questions.
Oh, I absolutely can and will. Ripple, indeed, one of the reasons I joined the company, I've told you this, but it is I felt like the company does a really good job of talking about what's going on, sharing what's happening to the company, coming out every quarter like this and talking about what the company is doing, what's happening both on the product side and the XRP side, and releasing that information on a very regular basis every 13 weeks, including doing something like this.
You know, I think transparency, particularly in an ecosystem that we are living in, both broadly at the digital asset level, but also within the XRP ecosystem, there's a lot of participants, there's a lot of activity, and I think Ripple, as one important player in that ecosystem, it's important that we're transparent and important that we're proactive, I think, in trying to address questions.
Well, and I want to get to the quarterly report about XRP sales, which comes out, and I've told people, like, you want to know what the company's doing with this issue of XRP and the ownership of XRP. Just look every quarter. We'll tell you exactly what we're doing. We'll lay it out in lots of detail. So I want to get to that. But first, I just want to look. When I've been on the road for the last now almost 2 months, I find myself having to make this distinction. There's XRP, which is this digital asset that is used and held by many people and then used by many companies to develop upon. But then there's the business of Ripple making and selling software. What are the highlights from the last quarter for you? I would presume they're almost all on the software side and the business side.
Well, the first of all highlight is we hired Cory Johnson.
Oh, yeah.
Highlight number one.
That was certainly.
You know, look,
actually, it was for me. So.
I will start by saying we had our Q1 all hands. At the end of each quarter, we have an all hands where we bring our team in from around the world, and we had it actually in this space. And we walked through everything that kind of had transpired. And you know, for me, it does start with customer traction. We had an incredible quarter. There's no question about that. We signed more than one production contract a week in Q1. That is.
I got to say, internally, it was really cool to see the emails roll through.
Yeah.
I wanted to, of course, to tell everyone about it, but I couldn't. But it's just a fascinating thing to watch the momentum build.
The momentum really has built, and I think that's partly we're getting better at what we do. We're better at articulating how our products work. But another one is we're adding nodes to the network. The value of a network grows by the square of the number of nodes on the network.
Metcalfe's law, very good. Look at you.
And you know, we definitely saw that increase in Q1 significantly. We signed banks like Itaú in Brazil.
Biggest bank in Brazil.
We signed Indosend in India. We signed Linlan Pay in China as just a few examples. Another one that it got some attention, but I particularly am very excited about, is we added the Saudi Arabian Monetary Authority, the Central Bank of Saudi Arabia, as a customer of Ripple's. And they joined Bank of England as a customer, as a central bank engaging with us. And that also has really great secondary and tertiary impacts in working with the ecosystem throughout the Middle East. And
so it's more than a stamp of approval. They've got the connections on the rails there in the Middle East.
Right, and they see that we're moving from an analog to digital nature in terms of cross-border payment flows, and they obviously leaned in and joined with us. So Q1 was in not just adding great talent across the board, across engineering, in product, but also, you know, certainly in the customer. We're going to continue to focus on solving real problems for real customers, and I think Ripple remains the leader in real production enterprise use case for blockchain technologies.
Yeah, the growth, when I started interviewing in February, right, you guys told me you had 190 employees. A few weeks later, I have the job. I'm on the road with Ron Will, our CFO, and he's telling people we've got 225 employees. And that kind of like 10% growth in employees over the course of a few weeks, it's fun to see that.
Well, when you sign as many production contracts in Q1, the thing I start to get concerned about is making sure that we continue to scale the organization to serve those customers and deploy them and engage them and make sure they have a great experience. At the end of the day, we're going to measure success by volume. We're going to and that is going to indicate how happy those customers are. Are we solving that real problem, reducing friction and increasing speed and reducing cost for that cross-border payments problem?
Well, I think that's also one of the issues too when we talk about which corridors are so important for this business and which banks are so important. I think I've started to figure out that we might make a bigger difference for smaller banks that want to be up-and-comers, or in corridors, maybe not the corridors we think about sitting here in a major city in the US, but the corridors where it's really expensive and really slow, even worse than it is, say, U.S. to Mexico.
There's no question, and I think some people shudder and think about, okay, well, wait a minute, how do some of the big banks think about this? Look, some of the largest banks in the world are leaning in a very big way, both in what we're doing with xCurrent, certainly what we're doing with the rule book, which is something that we're in the process of finalizing also.
Right. So, all right. So you're talking about xCurrent, which essentially is a replacement for Swift messaging. Doesn't necessarily use XRP in transactions. Probably doesn't for most of the cases. But xRapid introduced fairly recently. How's that going? Where is it going? What's working?
Yeah, it's an important distinction, and I think one of the things we did a better job in Q1 is we were even more transparent in publishing to the world, hey, here's what xCurrent is, here's how xCurrent works. That works if you have a bilateral relationship between two banks, and there's pre-funding, what's called
banks are already working together.
That's
They're
correct.
already using the relationships that they've established.
There's already liquidity on both sides. But what happens is some of those financial institutions would say to us, well, wait a minute, that works great for my existing relationships. What about if I want to settle into a currency that I don't have a relationship? xRapid solves that problem from liquidity. We entered into beta with that product in late Q3. We signed our first pilot customer in Q4, which from my point of view, to launch a product in beta and sign a customer that quickly was heroic.
Especially in banking.
Especially in banking.
Where things aren't known to move fast. I don't know if you've been to a bank, but yes.
We signed and have announced 6 additional pilot customers on xRapid in Q1, including the Western Unions of the world, the Cambridge FX. So I think huge progress. And I think we certainly will move from beta into production with xRapid this year.
So xRapid starts to take hold. We see people starting to use that. I think also, you were just talking to some people earlier, and I caught some of that conversation. And there was this notion about how banks are pulling out of the places where they've got currency pairs, the places where they've already got corridors. That business, even as we are going into it, it is shrinking.
It's really kind of surprising. Global commerce, global transactions continue to increase at a nice clip on a year-on-year basis. Correspondent banking, the nature of how cross-border transactions occur, the number of correspondent banking relationships has decreased by about 50% over the last 10 years. That's kind of fascinating.
It'd be fascinating if there wasn't global growth. If we were in a recession, it'd be fascinating.
Well, so you ask, so why is that happening? And it's because the cost of supporting those correspondent banking relationships is significant. It's your parking capital, you have dormant capital sitting over there, you have compliance costs. Particularly after some regulatory changes associated with something called Basel III, which I won't go into today, the nature of how that's measured.
Well, it's not that complicated with Basel III.
You're smarter than I am.
Well, no, banks had to have a lot of money in their balance sheet.
Right.
And wherever they had it counted before Basel III.
Correct.
After Basel III, wherever they had it, it didn't count. If it was it was sitting waiting for a transaction to happen across borders, it no longer counted as an asset towards their reserve requirements.
That's exactly right. You said it brilliantly.
It's not that complicated, but that's a big deal because suddenly the banks may have had some benefit of being in the banking in the cross-border payment business.
The cost of
that wasn't doing cross-border payments.
Right. The cost of supporting that corridor went up with the changes in Basel III. What xRapid allows you to do is to still enable payments into a country without being in that country. That may sound kind of crazy, but that's effectively what it's doing. And we've had banks around the world, financial institutions and payment providers have leaned in and already started using as a pilot xRapid. But I'm optimistic that if you're solving a real problem for those customers, and it's at a lower price and a better outcome, that you're going to continue to see many financial institutions lean in.
And just for clarity, xCurrent does not require the use of XRP.
That's correct.
But xRapid does.
That's correct.
So there have also been some interesting things. I thought the Santander announcement of a consumer-facing product using xCurrent is really interesting.
Yeah, so Santander has been one of our earliest customers. They've been a fabulous partner, and I think all the way up to the chairwoman of Santander, they've been advocates of what we're doing. And they have launched and been more and more public about some of the things they're doing. At their analyst day not too long ago, they talked very publicly about the number of corridors they wanted to be live in with Ripple's technology this calendar year. This Q1, they publicly started talking more about OnePay FX, and this is a product, a consumer-facing product that allows real-time payments across pounds to dollars, pounds to euros, euros to pounds, et cetera. And originally they had launched that, I think last summer, intra-Santander for the employees.
Still a big deal.
This is now going across their very large, I think they have 144 million customers, deposit accounts, et cetera.
Because I don't think people understand when they use these interesting services like TransferWise or Zelle or PayPal or Venmo, that while it's a fancy interface on the front end, it's still the old jalopy in the back end that those companies are having to deal with.
Yeah.
But it's still moving money really slowly in the back end, or at higher cost.
It's an important point. And sometimes when I'm at various conferences, I'll talk about, it's interesting to me that a lot of the innovation we talk about in payments is really just happening at a very, very application layer. And it's constrained by everything underneath. And from its inception, Ripple has been focused on how do we reset the fundamental rail? How do we enable innovation throughout the payments experience by changing the nature of how payments flow at the infrastructure level? And that's partly through things like xCurrent messaging. Right. It's partly through things like xRapid. And we've talked a little publicly about a product we have called xVia, which is effectively a API wrapper to allow access to those first two.
The way I talk about that when I'm on the road or when I'm here in San Francisco, is that it's sort of like if you're a corporation and you're lucky enough to have a bank that's dealing with xCurrent and maybe dealing with xRapid and moving money really quickly. How do you access that if you're sitting in Amazon and you've got 250, 300 engineers who are full-time writing APIs to deal with all the payment problems and all the banks they've got all over the world? Maybe this can reduce that cost for them and give them one single interface.
That is absolutely the vision. And to the extent that companies can write to one API that allows them a payment interface to many, many currencies around the world, many, many payment networks. And we talk about an oil company that has truck drivers in Nigeria that they don't have a bank account. They want to be paid out on M-Pesa.
Right.
How does a bank enable that payment? Well, that's, in some ways, from a kind of an internet technologies point of view, well, that's just an interoperability question. In today's payment infrastructure, that's actually hard to do.
Right.
Let me
paraphrase that. You could send a text message to that truck driver in a second.
Yeah,
you could send him an email with the information about the money they were trying to pay him.
Right.
But he's still got to wait, at least a week.
Well, there's a lot of fees in there as well. That,
sure.
Particularly if it's a lower value payment, a lot of it gets eaten up with fees, which isn't great.
So let's talk about XRP a little bit. The company's gotten a lot of attention. The space has gotten a lot of attention because of the huge run-up at the end of December and into January. During the first quarter, however, there was about a 70% meltdown across all of the entire space. What do you make of that, and what does that tell us about the industry?
Well, the first thing I would say is the industry is still nascent.
Yeah.
I think, and I have said publicly, I think there continues to be a need for a maturation process. The whole industry is going to mature, and I think, look, we should expect there to continue to be a lot of volatility in the digital asset market broadly. Certainly, we saw that in the XRP market, as you pointed out. The whole industry, the whole category was down roughly 70%, and XRP was down about 70% also. I don't think as much.
Even as you pointed out, we signed more deals than ever before. One could argue that XRP had one of the worst quarters ever, maybe the worst quarter ever.
Yeah.
And yet Ripple had one of the best quarters ever.
For sure. Well, we definitely had our best quarter ever. I think it speaks to, it is early days. There continues to be, misinformation. There continues to be, angst about, hey, what does the regulatory framework look like on a global basis? I think Ripple has been relatively unique in the whole ecosystem of saying, look, we're going to lean in and we're going to work with regulators. We're going to work with governments around the world. And certainly I spent a lot of time in Q1 doing exactly that. And I think it's important to educate, explain. There's still a lot of misinformation out there at a lot of levels.
I was at a conference in Chicago on Monday, and every panel, someone brought up the question or had to deal with a question about whether whatever crypto, whatever, is a security. And you're getting the question like crazy, as am I. What's your notion of that?
I thought you were going to ask easy questions today.
No. What made you think anything was changing here just because I'm working here now?
First of all, I think this is a really important question. I think it's important that it's discussed. And I think it's also important to realize at the end of the day, this is going to be decided by the SEC, not by pundits, not by academics. It's going to be decided by the SEC. And I think that's important. I think what you're seeing is an appropriate conversation because a lot of the activity in this space, these are ICOs where the token has no utility. And I think you're going to find that the vast majority of them are, in fact, going to be deemed securities. For me, nothing has really changed in that I think it's clear that XRP should not be viewed as a security. And there's three really important reasons. The first is it's not a share of Ripple. There is a company called Ripple, right, and there is an ecosystem around XRP and an open source technology called XRP. And when you buy XRP, it doesn't give you shares or dividends or access to profits of Ripple, the company.
Well, and lots of people are developing on XRP. Lots of other companies. I mean, Michael Arrington's running this whole. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump here.
Yeah, that's all right.
Well, no, like Michael Arrington's developing this entire fund of XRP investments to help other companies develop on this technology.
That's exactly right. I mean,
as are others.
So if the first point is around, it's not a share in Ripple. The second point is that the XRP ecosystem, the XRP ledger, is an open source, free, decentralized technology that exists independent of Ripple. If Ripple, the company, were to go away tomorrow, the XRP ledger would continue to operate and continue to exist. So I think you're going to.
We're not going away tomorrow.
No, we just hired you. Everything's going to be great.
I've got kids to feed.
So I think it's an important distinction around the independence. The third, and as I referenced around some of these ICOs, is there's a real utility in the XRP token. And I think to the extent it's solving a real problem at scale, and I think, again, we demonstrated certainly in our usage of the XRP ledger that, and I think you are, as you referenced, you're seeing more companies take advantage of the XRP ledger. And the reason is the XRP ledger is about 1,000 times cheaper per transaction than Bitcoin.
Right.
And it's about 1,000 times faster per transaction than Bitcoin. So I think you're seeing other companies build other capabilities on top of the XRP ledger. You're going to continue to see that. And I think we want to see the whole ecosystem thrive.
I saw John Burbank last week at a different conference in New York. John's done a lot of investments here, but big Warriors fan.
Yeah.
Warriors, a partial owner there. And John, he had this really interesting notion that I've been thinking about, which is that the way a lot of people began to think about crypto, whatever, Bitcoin, let's say, or XRP, or Ether, or make up, fill in the blank, was through bombastic people on TV. Save me, putting up the same kind of charts that we've always used on the same network, using some of the same words that they've used to describe equities rising. And so that on some level, maybe even unconsciously, people start to think about this price graph as if it's a security or as if it's an equity even. And that when John says, at least, when I look at it, I see an adoption curve. I see the adoption of radio or TCP/IP or something like that, that is hard to get your head around something that does have a price, but is really about technological adoption, not about, but isn't tied to earnings growth and isn't tied to how many salespeople and feet you can put on the street, and that it has a different notion there, and so that these seemingly unsupportable rises in percentage gains in value is really tied to adoption, not tied to generating earnings power.
Look, it goes to the point of, like, this is an important conversation, and I think there's some very smart people at the SEC, and obviously the CFTC has looked at this, the IRS has looked at this, and
all come with different answers.
But I think it's an important conversation, and I think we're going to continue to have it. And I think smart, thoughtful people are going to come out, and I think should be clear that XRP is not a security.
Yeah. So XRP, markets report out today.
Yes.
Again, what I told you, I was thinking about taking this job, is one of the things I really like to see was this sort of level of disclosure. What did the company do in the first quarter? So the company sits on about 61 billion XRP.
Plus or minus,
yes. What happened with that in the first quarter?
So this is the fifth quarter consecutively we've done these XRP markets report. And again, as you pointed out, it's really a goal to be as transparent as possible. We are one important player in the XRP ecosystem, and we want other participants in the XRP ecosystem to rest assured that we're acting in the best interest of the whole ecosystem. What we shared today, showed that we did just under 10 basis points of daily market activity in terms of our sales into the market, and that's actually a decrease from previous quarters. We want to continue to be one of the very healthy stewards of developing the whole ecosystem.
So less than 1/10%.
That's right.
So the notion that that the company's sales of XRP were affecting the price. You never really know.
I think it's clear no one person can affect the XRP markets directly. And I think it is, as we said, it's an open source, decentralized technology. Ripple can't control that. I'm not aware of anyone that can control that. And I think we want to make sure that as one participant, our activity is transparent, that people are aware of how we're thinking about. And really, it's our view of here's how we think the whole market behaved and acted, and some of that is even beyond just the XRP market. It's also the digital asset market overall.
When I think of it, I also think that by having a little more XRP into the system trading, it does create opportunities for market makers to make money, and we know they're making a lot of money as market makers, but also does increase liquidity in those places where we want people to be able to do business or develop on that software or whatever.
Liquidity is a key measure. Volume, liquidity are key measures of the health of the overall ecosystem. All of the participants in the ecosystem benefit from that liquidity.
And to that, I guess we're doing some things as a company to try to help accelerate that liquidity in the markets where of course, I suppose we want it in every market, but certainly markets where we're doing business. For
sure. We do a number of incentives that, we've been, proactive in advertising. We announced a program in Q4, actually, called the RippleNet Accelerator Program. And this is where we're using, well, frankly, dollars as well as XRP to incentivize the adoption of our technologies, the usage of these technologies. I actually think about it when I moved, to Silicon Valley, 21 years ago. I think it was similar to a company you and I both know, PayPal.
Right.
I remember signing for PayPal, and I got a free $20. PayPal was driving these network effects.
Started off as 10, they raised it to 20 when it slowed
exactly.
down.
Then it went down to 5, I think, as I recall.
You know why? Because they were losing money.
Well, so we view this as how do we drive network effects, and using incentives as part of those network effects. Even Visa in the earliest days of developing the Visa network used various incentives to drive those same behaviors. And so we're really borrowing a page from people that came way before us in understanding how networks evolve and develop, and using incentives as part of that makes a ton of sense to us.
If only Diners Club had thought of the same thing. So Diners Club did not hire Snoop. But
well,
you were going to help.
Sure.
You were going to help arrange for me to have a little. Do you know about my history of Snoop Dogg?
I don't.
Oh, wait,
tell me.
Well, first, tell them why am I mentioning Snoop?
Well, we are hosting.
Yes.
As we've talked about, there's a lot of participants in the XRP ecosystem, and so we're hosting an XRP community night. This is for whether it's wallet providers, exchanges, market makers, everyone who's in the ecosystem. We frankly want to celebrate. It's been a tremendous year in many, many ways. And so we're hosting an event as part of Blockchain Week in New York City, and we decided to bring on some entertainment. And at the event we're hosting called XRP Community Night, Snoop Dogg is the entertainment.
So Snoop Dogg was, so before I did this startup, and before I did some media startups and say TheStreet.com and so on, I did a couple magazines, and one of them was Vibe magazine with Quincy Jones. And this young 19-year-old rapper, we put him on the cover. He's on Dr. Dre's new record.
Snoop Dogg.
His name was Snoop Dogg, and I had a big story in that issue.
I'm sure he remembers you.
I'm sure he can't forget it. And then in the first issue of Slam magazine, which I also helped start, we did a thing of fact-checking the things Snoop Dogg says about his basketball career as a high school player.
Nice.
He didn't do all the things that he said as a basketball player, but we can discuss it with him in a few weeks. Also, during the last, sort of aside from the business that we do, there was this Donors Choose thing over the last quarter that I thought was really cool.
Yeah, this was a powerful day, and I think for Ripple employees, and really I think everyone around the community, it was a prideful day. We decided to make a donation to an organization that I really can't say enough good things about, called Donors Choose. And Donors Choose is an organization started by just an amazing CEO named Charles Best, who recognized that the public school teachers were spending a lot of their own money to fund various projects in the classroom. So the Donors Choose website allows people to fund specific projects in your community, maybe at your school.
Example?
Well, I went to Topeka High School, and certainly there are projects on there from Topeka High. And we decided to fund every project in the entire United States. And it was a privilege. It was an honor. Ripple has been.
These are teachers who don't have enough chalk for their classroom, or teachers who want to do something, take their kids on a field trip to the local museum, but can't get the school district won't pay for it.
Yeah, I just think Ripple is incredibly privileged to be in a position we can give back, and I think Donors Choose is a organization that is worthy of not just our generosity, but everyone's. It's an incredible organization.
So in the little town upstate New York, where I grew up for the most part, there was a teacher who rewards students who are doing well at reading and gives them a special chair to sit in, and she wanted to buy another chair for these kids. And so I got this really nice email from her, saying I was able to get this chair for my kids, and it's so great to help them read with this special.
Right.
It's those little things that the better teachers, the great teachers want to do, don't have the money for.
Yeah.
I thought it was super cool. It's cool that Stephen Colbert announced it.
Yeah, that was really
I guess
cool.
He's on the board of Donors Choose or
That's
something.
correct. Yeah, he's been a long-time advocate of the program.
Oh, so I just want to say the thing again, because I get tired of saying on the road. The difference between XRP and Ripple is what?
XRP is the XRP ledger is an open source, decentralized technology. Ripple is one of the companies in the XRP ecosystem that is building on top of that technology. I'll be honest, it's frustrating to me that I continue to see journalists that I think conflate the two in many cases, when they know there is a difference, it adds to the confusion.
Of course it does.
And it's clear that they are separate, they are distinct, and we will continue to make those points. And I think you'll see more and more companies that are investing and building on top of the XRP ledger, which will make it clearer. But there's work to be done there, and we'll keep making those points.
I've said to you before when I've interviewed over the course of the last, call it 15 years, thanks for having me. But in this case, I actually mean it. I appreciate it every other week.
Absolutely. I think it's important we do these on a regular basis. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we'll keep trying to be proactive in clarifying and educating how Ripple is doing.
Yeah, so there's your quarterly Q&A. Brad Garlinghouse and Cory Johnson. Thanks for watching us.
Thank you.